With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim Rambam. We are learning Hilchos, Beis Habchira, prakim Beis, Gimel, and Dalid. Pedig Beis deals entirely with the Mizbeach. And Kevin, we will need some pictures which will be extremely helpful. Pedig Beis has 18 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph, says that Rambam, HaMizbeach Mekoymoi Mechuven BeYosef, that the Mizbeach has to be built in a precise location. And and that location may never be changed. Shneimar, as it says, and he's quoting a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, V'zeh mizbach la'oila liyisrael. Here again, you see that even the lashon of the pasuk is, we specify a mizbach for an oila, just continuing to what we pointed out yesterday. Not a mizbach for karbanos, but for the oila and the other karbanos. Now, says the Rambam, Ubam Mikdash, it was exactly on this location that Nekad Yitzchak Avinu, obviously there was no Mikdash yet, but in the place that will become the Mikdash, that was where Yitzchak was bound. Shneimar, as it says, V'lech lecha el eretz ha-moiriya, one of the many words we give for Har HaBayis. And how do we know that Ha-moiriya is in reference to the place of the Mikdash? Because it says, Vayachel Shlomo livnes space Hashem Yerushalayim, where? Bahar Ha-moiriya. Asher nida leDavid avihu, Asher heichen b'mekom David, and all of that was begoiden Ornon Hayevusi, who was also known as the Ornon the Aravna, as we'll see in a moment. Now, halacha beis u'mesoidis b'yad hakoil, it's a universally accepted tradition. Begoiden Aravna, it used to be the threshing place of this fellow called Aravna, which is also Ornon Hayevusi. That's the exact place. And that was the place upon that Mizbeach for Akkad, all of Yitzchak. Imagine, and that is the place Shabana by Noach Kishayatzim in Ateva. Even though the Torah writes explicitly that the Teva rested in Har Ararat, which we know somewhere in Turkestan, somewhere in the north. But when he brought a carbon, he went down and he went to this location. And that's exactly, imagine, that's the Mizbeach Shehikrev by Olav Kayin Vehevel. Each one offering their carbon. Ubay Hikrev Adam Harishim. When he was created, he right away brought a carbon. Umisham Nivra, actually the earth from which Adam, which is Adam and Chava, were formed, was exactly from that location. And indeed, Amr Chachamim, Adam Mimekayim Kaparais Nivra, Adam was created from the place where he would find his very own atonement. All of that is explaining why the Makim is Mechuven BeYosef. We cannot change that place at all. Now, halacha Gimel, not only does the location have to be exactly where it is, but Midos HaMizbeach, the dimensions of the altar, are Mechuvanes Harbe, the very precise. Vitzurasai and its design, Yadua Ish Me'ish, is known because it was passed down from one to another. Umizbeach Shubanu B'nei Hagoyla, that when the Yidden came back from Babel or from Parasumadai to build the second base on Mikdash, they built it Ke'ein Mizbeach She'asad Lihibonis Asoy. They built it more like the dimensions of the future third temple, and not like the dimensions of the second temple, as we'll see in a moment. And the Rambam says, Ve'ein lo hoisev al midasoy, the Mizbeach that was built for the second temple has to remain the way it was when we're going to build the third time, the final time, not to add to it, nor to reduce its dimensions. Halacha Dalet. Now that we said that the makim of the Mizbeach is precise, so in other words, when they built it Bisman by Yisheni, they needed to have someone who knew exactly where it must be placed. How did they know it then? There were 3 prophets that returned to Eretz Yisrael with the people during the building of the second temple. And by the way, they built the Mizbeach prior to building the temple itself. That was the first thing that was built. One prophet was there to testify exactly where the location of the Mizbeach must be. The other one testified al pi nevuah. Aside of the fact that they had a tradition ish meish of its dimensions, and the hechad heyed olhem, and you needed another prophet, or there was another prophet to testify al pinavuam shemakriven al mizbeach hazeh kol karbonis, that you can already offer on the mizbeach that they built karbonis afal pi she'ein sham bayis, even though the temple was not yet built. And that's the sheet of the Rambam, that of course it's better to have a Beis Hamikdash. But if you have the Mizbeach built in the right location, the right way, you can already offer karbanis. Obviously, you have other issues of Tumantara, you have issues of who are Kohanim, but all these issues can be dealt with. Halacha, Mizbeach she'asa Moshe, and the one that was later made by Shlomo, and then when it was further made by Bnei HaGoyla, and finally v'sha'asad lehei asois, they all share the same height. Kulam eser amas goiva kol echad mehem. They had a total height of 10 amas. I asks the Rambam, it says explicitly in Parshas Truma, sholosh amos koimasi, that its height was only 3 amas. So teaches the Rambam, the meaning of that pasuk is mokem hamaracha bulvad. That's referring to the top part of the Mizbeach upon which the maracha, the wood, the pyre was arranged. And as we'll see in a moment, maybe if we're going to have a picture now on the Zoom, that I'm going to speak this out by heart. If you have a picture, that will be helpful. That the Mizbech you can divide into the lowest part, which we will call a base, which protruded the most. It was the widest part. You can leave it the way it is. Then at some point, it was what we called, the base is called the Yisoid. Let's get familiar with the words. When you went up, furthermore, there was at some point a soivev, a ledge. After the ledge, higher than the ledge, the altar, dimensions of the altar went in, became narrower, both in the width and in the length. The final part of the altar was only 3 amas. All of the altar above the ledge was 3 amas. Truth be told, you also had on all the 4 corners horns, which had another amma of height, but we're not counting that. So when the Torah says it was 3 amas height, it's referring to the area above the ledge. Now the Rambam is also referring to the area above the ledge, the area upon which the pyre is put, because the wood is put on top. But we don't say it's put on top of it all. It's put on top of this top part. Now, and as the Rambam just said, and the same thing will be in the Mizbeach that we will build with the coming of Mashiach. If you were to measure the bottom, the lowest, which is the widest and the longest dimensions of the Mizbeach, you begin on the ground with the dimensions of 32 amas by 32 amas. Halachavav. Esed amas shall go Mizbeach. When we say that the total height had 10, so like this, another very big klal. How many tvachim do you need to create an amma? It's not consistent. You have different types of amas. You have an amma that's comprised of 5 tvachim. You have an amma that's comprised of 6 tvachim. Then actually in the 6 tvachim itself, you have 2 types. Whether the tvachim are tight, whether they're loose. We're not going into this right now. The question will be only, are we using 5 tvachim amas or 6 tvachim amas? And it's not consistent. Says the Rambam, mehen ba'ama bas chamisha tvachim. And don't worry, the Rambam is going to tell you exactly which one of the 10s, which 2 of the 10s were 5, and all the rest were out of 6. Was bas shisha tfachim. So to word it differently, you can't say 10 amas because we know that these amas are not the same. Some of them were 5, some of them were 6. So if you want to know how tall was the Mizbeach, it had a total of Shmoina B'chamishim Tefach, 58 Tfachim. Gewaldig. Okay, now, says the Rambam, Halach Zayin, V'kach, Hoysot, Midosei, Yitzorosei, these were the Mizbeach's dimensions and its design. All Chamisha Tfachim, the lowest Amma, we're going up, was the first of the 2 that were only made out of 5 Tfachim. So when you went up 5 Tfachim, and as we already said, the width and the length is 32 by 32. You went up only 1 amma, and it's really a short amma. Then you went in, the kanas, you went in also only 5 tfachim. So that lowest protruding part is what we call the Mizbeach's base, or in Lashon HaKodesh, the Yisoid, the Zehu Yisoid. Nimtza roichav shloishim amma. If you were now to measure the dimensions of the Mizbeach right above the Yisoid, if you began with 32 by 32, Right, we're speaking about 32 amas of 6 tfachim, and the lowest amma is takan amma, but it's only a 5 tfachim, both the height, and it went in only 5. So each side it went in 5. So if you were now to measure the dimensions of the width and the length, you'll have exactly 30 and 2 tfachim by 30 and 2 tfachim. Now Allah shloishim tefach, you went up another 30 tfachim. Okay, these are going to be amas really of 6 tfachim. So we have now 5 amas of 6 tfachim. So really you're 6 amas off the ground, but it's not consistent because the lowest one is a 5 tfachim. Above the base, when you're going up another 5 amas. So it's a total, let's say, of 6 off the ground, 5 above the yasoid. And again, v'kanas chamisha tfachim, and you go in 1 amma, but not a 6, a 5. And that's called the ledge. Because since now the dimensions going higher will be narrower, so indeed the Kohanim, as we'll see, were able, and they did walk on that ledge when needed, which is called the Soivev. Now, if you were to measure the width and the length of the Mizbeach above the ledge, it will now chab Shmoina ve'esrim amma and 4 tfachim, again, because it goes in an amma only of 5 tfachim. And now, like we mentioned before from the Pasuk and Truma, Shalish Amma is Koimasai, this top part, we're going up above the ledge. Now you go up 3 Ammas. These 3 Ammas are of 6 Tvachim. 6 times 3 is 18. You go up 18 Tvachim. And now, Vikkoinis, Lekeren, Zavius, Shalashmaino Asad Binyan Chalal Murubal Chal Arba Koranais, now you would make an additional protruding upwards, which is going to be called a keren, a horn, and that is 1 amma. Each one of the 4 horns took up the space of an amma. Right inside, if you can now imagine yourself walking on the top of the altar, so the path that was designated exclusively for the Kohanim to walk was also 1 amma. So when you deduct the amma width of the horn, every horn was an amma tall, but it was an amma wide, an amma long, and then you add another amma that was designated for the walkway of the Kohanim. You began with the 28 and 4, but now we're deducting from it. So what are you left with? Don't forget, it's 2 on each side. Arba ve'esrim amma, 24 amma and 4 tvachim. Al arba ve'esrim amma bar tvachim. In other words, the usable area upon which we'll see we put various ma'arachos was 24 amas and 4 tvachim. Halacha 8. Goiva kol keren v'keren chamisha tvachim. This is the final 5 tefach amma when we're speaking about the amas that are going up. Even though both the horizontal amma of the base and the horizontal amma of the ledge is also only a 5 tvachim. But the Rambam is not focusing on that. So when we said that when we're going up the height, the total height has 10 amas, that includes the height of the horn. 2 of them were only at a 5 tvachim, the lowest and the highest. No, it's tchilas and v'seif and v'tchilas. In other words, it was like a cube, these horns. The arba hakaronis were also chalulis mitoichin that were hollow inside of them. Again, this markim hamaracha, which is again the area of the altar, which is above the ledge, to the top, not to the top of the horn, but to the top where you put the maracha, was 18 tvachim. The nimsa chatzi goiva hamizbeach beshisha tvachim misoif hasoiv ulamat. If you want to go to exactly the middle of the altar, if you would be standing on the ledge, you would go down. You would go down 1 full amma. And then you would be exactly in middle of the Mizbeach. Now that you gave you the place of this middle of the height of the Mizbeach, halacha 9, the chut shal sikra, there was a dark red band, that was put around, it gartled the center of the altar, and that was a demarcation of the lower and the higher part of the Mizbeach, lahavdil, to separate bein damim ha'al yonim, as we'll learn, God willing, soon. For example, when you sprinkled the blood of oilas ha'oif, it needed to be on the higher part of the Mizbeach. To the damim atachtonim, let's say, of the chatos ha'oif. Similarly, where the animal korbanos needed to be put under the chut hasikra, right? The animal chatas actually went on the horns, but there are certain bloods you have to know, higher or lower. If you're going from the ground until the place of the pyre, you have 9 amas minus a tefach. Again, the mizbeach's height is 10 amas, but don't forget that the top amma is only the horn. We're not counting that. We're speaking about the pyre. We also said that the Yesoid's height is only 5 tefachim. So what's the height? It's 9, but it's not really 9. If we're going to be consistent and say that every amma is of 6 tefachim, so it's the height of 9 ammas, bashisha minus 1 tefach. Halacha yud. Another very important detail. Now let's go more into the base. So it's important to get to, in your mind, you can just imagine the dimensions of Mizrach, Ma'ariv, Safin, and Darim. All right. I'm always going to be, when I'm pointing ahead, I mean towards Ma'ariv, which means I'm sitting from Mizrach, we're going to Ma'ariv, which would then make the north on the right and the Darim on the left. So says the Rambam, the Yisoid HaMizbech, unlike the ledge that mamish circled the entire altar, the base did not circle the entire altar. On the entire northern part, there was a base. On the entire western part, there was a base. And not only that, but when you went into the south, when you went from southwest to north, when you went from southwest to east-west, in other words, when you went down the southern part from Ma'ariv to Mizrach, there was only 1 amma of a Yisoid. For Eichel B'Darim, only an amma achas. And then when you are in the northeastern corner, it also only went in 1 amma, Mizrach amma achas, which then would mean that on the Keren, the Roimis, Mizrachis, there was no Yisoid altogether. Okay, halacha yudaf. Ubekeren marav is the Roimis. Now let's go to the top of the altar. When you're going into the southwest corner, is the part of the mizbeach that's closest to the heichel. There were shnei nekavim. There were 2 little holes that resemble 2 nostrils. And they are also known as the shisin. Very good. So these 2 holes, thank you over here, they were actually on the base. Bloods would leak, would go through these holes, and they would get mixed in the ba'ama. This amma is referring to the drainage canal. In other words, there was some sort of canal that passed through the entire temple complex. And whenever the Kohanim wanted to clean out the floor of the Chatzar, right, they would plug in the drain and the waters would rise. So that would go into this canal. And the waters of this canal would go into the Nachal Kidron, into the Kidron River. Halacha Yud Beis. Ulamata baritzva, but on the floor itself, of that corner, on the floor of the corner, we're speaking about the Keren Marav is the Roimis. There was a makim amma al amma. There was a place 1 amma by 1 amma. The tavla shel shayis, the tabask of that was really, there was 1 block of marble. It was like 1 tile, and there was a ring which would allow you to open it up. That would allow, whenever needed, a kohen to go into the shisin, which went holes into the ground to clean them out. Sometimes the wine would go there and it would get hardened, and then it would clog it up. So every now and then you needed to clear it out. Halacha Yud Gimel. The kevesh hayaboyu banui l'droim shel mizbeach. As we learned yesterday, the ramp was built on the southern side of the altar. In other words, the lowest part of the ramp was really towards the south of the Azara, and you're going from south to north as you're working your way up to the top of the Mizbeach. How long was this ramp? It had 32 amas of length, and the width was 16 amas. However, even though the length was 32 amas, but since, as we mentioned, the Yesoid and the Soivev, they went in 1 amma, a 5 tfachim, but 1 amma, and the ramp went over both parts. So oichel ba'aretz, if you were to measure on the ground of the azara, it would only take up 30 amas from the side of the altar, because it would go over the amma of the yisoid as it would go over the amma of the soid. Another detail about the ramp, it didn't touch the altar proper. For Aver Ma'at, there was a little gap, there was a little airspace. In order for the Kahanim who took the parts of the Karbanis up the altar, up the ramp, so they didn't walk from there on, but while they were standing on the ramp, they would throw it on the pyre. And the very fact that there was a gap, that is what defines that action, not as placing, but as throwing. The Goiva HaKevesh, the height of the Kevesh, obviously, if the height of the Maracha was 9 amas, was Teisha amas, like we mentioned before, Pachushtus minus a sixth, Ad Keneged HaMaracha. Stam Lahoyer, that the Rambam before said Pachus Tefach, and here he's writing Pachushtus, which is the same thing, but why does the Rambam change his Lashon? Question. Halacha Yudah. Now, on the main ramp, there were 2 little off ramps. There was 2 small ramps that went off the large ramp, which allowed the Kahanim either to turn to the Yisoid, and you should know the little ramp that went to the Yisoid was on the western side. There was another off ramp that took you to the ledge. You see, the picture that Kavan is showing is only showing you the one on the west that would take you. You have 2 over here. I got it. So actually, the Rambam is, and there was one that went to the bottom. Here we go. I like the eastern one. So the small one that's leading to the ledge was on the right, or it was on the east, right? Yisoid was Maidiv, and the Soviv was on Mizrach. And both of these off ramps also, there was 1 hairbreadth of airspace separating the ramp from the altar. Another detail, the chaloy, there was a certain aperture, a certain opening that was on the maidiv of the ramp itself. And again, you went in there by a amo, and that was called uravucha hoysen ekreis. It's called a ravucha. The Bartenura says that the word ravucha means a hollow place. If there was a bird that became invalidated, and the halacha then would be that you can only burn it as you burn psuli amigdashim, which means until its form was decomposed. When we'll get later, we'll see that it doesn't necessarily mean that it physically gets decomposed. It means that it halachically gets decomposed. And that happens when you allow it to go overnight without doing anything to it. So now it becomes puzzle. It's called linas laila, which renders it into noisad, and that will be included in the din of tavar tzurasai. And then that bird would be burnt lebeis hasreifa, since the bird chatois were malikid in that location. So if there was an issue, that is where they had the window. It's very convenient to place the bird again. Acha tavar tzurasai, as we'll learn all of these prati dinim later on. Halacha tezvav. Ushnei shulchanish hoyba ma'irav towards the west of the ramp. There were 2 tables. One was made out of marble. One was made out of and on it they would put all of the limbs of the karbanis prior to it being brought up by the many kohanim that were zoicha and the pious. The other one was made out of silver, upon which they would put the clay shutters. And by the way, you don't put the limbs, you don't put the meat on the silver, because the silver would intermingle and it would make the meat a little bit spoiled. Halacha tazayin. When you build the mizbeach, it had to be made as one solid block, like a pillar. Yeah, the Rambam wrote that the horns were hollow, only the horns were hollow. But in the 9 amas, right, the 9 amas minus a tefach, there was nothing, it was a solid block. How did they make it? So first they would bring the avanim shleimas gedolos vikatanis that we learned about yesterday, that they would get psulas karka or from under the ocean, and they built a form, and they placed these rocks in the form. Only thing is, it's not a perfect fit, so they would make some sort of liquid that was comprised of sid, zephys, and konya, lime, pitch, and molten lead, what we would call a certain type of cement, a refined cement, and umamacha, they would mix it together. And when the stones were in the mold, as we'll speak out in a moment, the shoyfech l'toich malbim gadol kemidasin, they would pour it over the stones. and it would seep in between the stones that were all placed in a very large mold that contained the dimensions that we spoke above. That's the way they went upwards. Now, being that we said that there were two sides of the Mizbeach that barely had a Yesod, every side had a little bit of a Yesod, if not all of it, because like Rambam explained, right, that in the Mizrach there was one Amma of a Yesod, and in the Darum, by Maidav, there was one Amma of a Yesod, but the rest of it was empty. Now, when you're making a mold, what did you do if you're pouring cement in? So in the place where this Yesod could have been, they put a piece of wood, or a stone, it became Mizrachis, Kimidas HaYesod. You understand? So like this, when the cement became hardened and you remove the mold, you would then remove the wood. So that place would be empty. As we mentioned, the top, the horns were hollow, but you needed to make it go up for an amma, a 5 tvachim, but for the 5 tvachim. So inside the top of the horns, you would put a wood or a stone. Until the entire building was built in the right dimensions, this liquid would solidify, it would become hard. And you would remove the mold and remove these pieces of woods, as well as the fact that there needs to be 4 horns, that there has to be a base, and that the Mizbeach must be a square, that is essential. Even though the Rambam wrote that the Mizbeach of Bayis Sheni, as well as the final Mizbeach, we know these dimensions, but it's not essential. What's essential is the 4 horns, that there has to be a base, and it has to be square. Or nor a Yesod, even if one is missing, or the ram, or it's square, however, midas arkoyu, midas rachboyu, midas koimasoi, ein ma'akvin, v'hu shelo yifchais me amma al amma berom shalish amas. Look how little that can be b'di'evet. Kishir markam amaracha, the shir markam amaracha shal mizbach hamidbar, just to make it clear, isn't only in reference to the 3 amas, which is true because the top is the part over the ledge was 3 amas, but we will also in the Mizbeach that was built by Moshe, the place where they actually put the wood, the maracha itself was an amma by an amma. That's why he's saying over here it has to have amma by an amma, the height of 3 amas. Halacha final, halacha yutches, mizbach shenitgam b'binyane. Now that we described how it's built, now you'll understand that it's possible that after a while, an entire stone can fall out of this cement. We learned yesterday that if one of the stones have a nick, that's invalid. We're not speaking about a nick. We're speaking about, there's one stone, there's another stone. They're glued together because of this liquid, because of the cement. But it's possible for it to get broken. So if there is, that's the pegam. There's a stone that fell out. If what was removed was a tefach or more, then the mizbeach is invalid. You got to fix it, got to replace it. But if what fell out was less than a tefach, then it's still kosher. However, the rock itself cannot even have a nick on it. But if an entire rock fell out, and because the cement got loosened, again, then we have less than a tefach, the mizbeach still is kosher. That concludes today's first chapter of the Mizbeach. Pei Gimel, listen to this. We're going to go through the menorah, the shulchan, the mizbach haktoiras, and the kiyar and the kanai, all in the third chapter. Third chapter also has 18 halachas. Again, having a diagram was helpful. They printed here in the Chayenos and in many other Sfarim a diagram that the Rambam himself drew, even though the Rambam wrote that it's not exact. That not exact that the Rambam was referring to was the size, the heights of the cups and of the different ornaments that we'll see that were hewed out, that were knocked out of the block of gold. But the form, many parts of this picture is obviously exact as the Rambam made it. Halacha Aleph, Hamanoira, Nefeireshes, Surasa Batoira. Its design is explicit in the Torah. And what do we have? You have Arba'a Givim. Right, we're speaking now only about the central shaft. It had givim, or goblets, so there were 4 goblets. there were two kaftoidim. We'll call them, he touches them as two bulbs, and ushnei perachim, and two flowers. Again, this is all only in the center kana. Shenemer, as it says, ubamanoir arba gevim mishukadim kaftirei perachim. Furthermore, va'oid perach shlishi hayasamach liyarecha. There was another third perach flower near to the menorahs yerecha, near to the menorahs base. Shenemer, as it says, and now we're jumping from truma to baal loischa ad yerecha ad tircha, to its base, to its flower. Halacha 2. The sholosh raglayim hayalad, the menorah had 3 legs. There was actually a semi hemispherical bowl upside down that covered the legs. That's the way that Rambam designed it. Now there was also 3 other bulbs in the center shaft. Now we didn't mention them because they were connected to the fact that you had 6 branches coming out of the menorah, right? The Rambam drew these branches to be straight, not rounded. And so every one of these bulbs was the place from which you had a kana and a kana coming out from each side. Now, on every kana itself, on every branch itself, you had 3 gevim, 1 kaftan and 1 perach, and all of these ornaments were mishukadim. Now, the word mishukat means an almond. We're not speaking about the shape, we're speaking about texture. So whenever the Torah says mishukadim, it's just like shkedim, have little grooves throughout, so they would chisel out, they would bang out of the golden ornaments. The texture of these ornaments would not be smooth the way the rest of it is, but it was called mishukadim, gavaldik. Okay, halacha gimel. Nemseis, it comes out that kol hagviyim, the total amount of geviyim of gablets were 22, the total amount of perachim are 9, and kaftoidim were 11, and vekulan ma'akven zeh, all of them are essential, meaning afilu echad min hoshnayim v'arbaim, even if one of these total 42 were missing, then the menorah is not kosher. However, when are they essential? Only if the menorah was made out of gold, as ideally it should be. But if the menorah was made out of other metals, as de facto it was at times, when the goyim stole our clay hamikdash, or when when the world was tamei and we were not rich enough, wealthy enough at a time, then you don't make any of these ornaments. Another detail that is unique to when the menorah is made out of gold, as it ideally should be, is then it has to be called a kikar. It has to be made out of 1 talent. 1 talent is in reference to a weight of gold. A talent is 3,000 shekel weights. That's around 65 kilos. That's around 153 pounds. That would be, in today's currency, close to $500,000 of gold. Now, we learned in the Gemara that when Shlomo HaMelech made it, he had a special type of kikar for which you needed to weigh a tremendous amount. You needed to put a tremendous amount, I think it was 1,000 kikars of gold into a kiln, and it refined it until you remained with only 1 kikar. When we learned the Gemara, we made a cheshbon that the menorah of Shlomo HaMelech today would, of course, it's $1 billion in gold, some guzma number. But the simple gold, 1 kikar. 1 kikar is around 153 pounds of gold. And that includes the lamps, which are part of, and they extend from the Kenei Menorah. And again, and this weight is also only if it's made out of gold. But when they made it out of tin, after the story, after various parts of our story, when the Goyim came and they went into the Beis Hamikdash, it did not need to have that weight. And another detail unique to gold, it has to be hammered out from 1 block and not made out of pieces that were then put together. However, furthermore, you have to know how to read this. Either is referring to when it's made out of shar minei matchais, or it refers even to the gold that if you make it chalula, it can be kosher. Let's go back. Halacha. You may not take fragments of other pre-broken vessels and put them together by melting it down, even if you're making it out of gold, Or if you're making it out of other metals, that is something that may not be done. So here we don't differentiate. Halacha vav. Hamel kochayim. These are words the Torah uses. These are tongues, or what you would call today tweezers, that were needed to adjust the wicks, or to remove the wicks, or to put in the wicks, and the matchois and the ash scoops, and the utensils that held that pure olive oil, einon miklal hakikar. They were made out of gold, but that's not included in the weight of the kikar, which is again a weight of gold. And then the Torah says, however, the reason why the Torah didn't have to say Zohav Torah regarding the lamps proper, because the lamps were affixed. And therefore they are B'chlal the Kikar. Halacha 7. Shivas Kanei HaMenodah, the 7 branches of the Menodah, Ma'akrin Zeh. No matter what material you make the menorah of it, it must have these 7 branches. And the Shiva Neder Sen, the 7 lamps on top of each branch, are also Ma'akvin Zeh, Ben Shoysa Sholzav, Ben Shoysa Shoshalmin Himatchois, and the whole Hanerois, like we said before, always have to be affixed on top of the branches, on top of the Kanim. Halacha Ches, Sheshas Hanerois Hakavuam B'Sheshas Hakanim Hayitzim in HaMenodah, 6 of the 7. The wick was facing the center one. Now, whether it was the wick or whether they actually made on top of that ned, they made some sort of indentation, but it was all facing the center. But the center shaft, the lamp that's affixed to the center one, Pan of Keneged, Kodesh HaKadoshim, was facing towards the Holy of Holy, and that's the one that's called the Ner HaMaravi. So in Gemara, we had to remember Mishnais, we had a 3-way Machlokes Tanoim, but generally we can say you have the sheet of Rabbi Zajac ben Rab Shimon, which is what the Rambam is paskening, that the menorah was placed Safin Dorim. If you place the menorah Safin Dorim, then no single one is closer to Maidav. So what defines one Ner to be Ner HaMaravi? The one whose wick was facing, the wick was towards the western part of the Ner. That's the Ner HaMaravi. Unlike Shitas Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, once you would hold that the menorah was placed east, west, then some lamps are more east, some lamps are further west. But anyways, the Rambam holds, it's hard to see from the picture that you show, but that the menorah was not aligned the length of the menorah to the length of the room. The menorah went from south, north, or north, south. Then Hamaravi is simply referring to the wick, that the wick was closest to the Maidav. Halacha 9. Hagivim goblets, further details. They looked like Lekoises Alexandria, which means Shepiyam Racha v'Sholeim Katza. And again, interestingly, when the Rambam designed the menorah, not only did he make the kanim to be straight, but he had the cups placed upside down. And the Rebbe explained that fits the whole theme of the menorah, as the Chazal tell us that the windows of the Beis Hamikdash were shkufos, right? That the inside part was narrow, and the outside parts were wide, because the light was to shine in the world. So the same thing, a cup facing down is mashpia to makabel. Cups facing up is for you to be the makabel. The menorah is a mashpia, not a makabel. Ha'kaftoidim kimin tapuchim karoisiim. They look like apples face of kerois, which means that they were not perfectly round. They were actually elongated, but there was a symmetry, like lahavdil, a non-kosher egg, that both of its ends were kadin. Okay, both of them, but it was not a perfect circle. And the flowers, what we're calling flowers, were like pirchei amudim. It was common in the times of the Rambam that people would make, beautiful ornaments inside wood, inside metal, and the flowers would mean that the flower itself is shaped round like a bowl, but then the edges are bent outwards, which is what gives it that flower-like appearance. Halacha Yud. The height of the menorah was a total of 16 tefach. Or we can call this 3 amas. Bas shisha tefachim. Haraglayim v'perach, the feet, and the perach that's near the feet took up a total of 3 tefachim of height. Then you had 2 tefachim that nothing was on it. Then there was the next tefach shebay givia kaftor v'perach. Then you had 2 tefachs that were smooth, nothing. Then you had a tefach of a kaftor from which the lowest 2 of the branches, u'shnei konom yitzim mimenu, echad helach ve'echad helach. And then the Rambam goes off for a moment and he tells you that the total height of all of the branches was exactly the same height of the center shaft. Let's go back to the center shaft. And then you have a tefach of nothing. Then you have another tefach, which was the kafter from which the next set of the two and they also then you had another tefach that was cholak. Then you had a tefach with the final kafter from which then after that you had tefachim cholak, in which you add the final three ornaments, kaftor v'terach, all in the three tefachim. Halacha Yudalef. The Evan hoisol lefnei hamanoida. There was a stone placed right in front of on the ground the manoida. Oba shalosh milos. You had 3 steps. She'oleh kohen oimed omeitev esaneres, for which the kohen can go up and prepare and kindle the candles. And on the top of the steps, while he was doing the hatava. Just lahoyer that now the Rambam said the Menorah had 18 tefachim, right? Now a person can reach to the top of 18 tefachim, which is 3 amas. So let's say the height of an average person. You don't need to have steps, but don't forget that the Kohen Gadol also did the avodah whenever he wanted, whatever he wanted. The Kohen Gadol wore a tzitz. On the tzitz, you had the name Kodesh Lashem. Therefore, the Kohen Gadol was not allowed to pick his hands above the tzitz. So that's why you needed to have the steps. Because if you wouldn't have the issue with the tzitz, you can stand on the ground. But then you would have to lift your hand up if you would be short. But now that you made this Evan Lefnei HaManoida, that already raised you much higher. Halacha Yud Beis. Now we're moving on to the next clay Hamikdash of this chapter, which is the Shulchan. Stam Lahoyer, that if you open up a parshas in the Chumash, so there's a whole different Seder, correct? What's the Seder in the Chumash? Seder in the Chumash is the Aron Kodesh, right? Who's about the Aron Kodesh? Then the Torah tells you the Shulchan, then the Menorah, and then the Yeriyos. The Rambam has a whole different Seder. He didn't speak about the Aron Kodesh at all. He began with the Mizbach La'olah, and now he went to the opposite, not Shulchan Menorah, but Menorah now the Shulchan. Halacha Yud Beis. HaShulchan Haisa Arkoi, the length of the Shulchan. Now the Shulchan's length went to the length of the room was 12 tefach, or you can call it 2 amas of 6 tefachim, and its width was exactly half of that 6 tefachim. And how was it placed? And the Rambam writes there was only 2 exceptions to this rule. The Chen Charkol Akenim Shul HaMikdash, almost all of them, Arkan Arkan Shal Bayis. V'rachman L'Rechav HaBayis. What's the exception? Number 1, the Aron HaKodesh. As we'll get to soon, God willing, and the Chen Neiras HaMenodah, like we just quoted in Halacha Ches, was also connected to Rechav HaBayis. Again, Kishittas Rabbi Eliezer, but Rav Shimon, not like Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that it went Minat Safin L'Dorim and not from Mizrach to Ma'ariv. Halacha Yud Gimel. Now, leave that picture right where it is. Right outside the table, don't forget there were 2 arrangements on top of the table. Each arrangement had on it 6 lechem apanim breads. Now, what kept it properly in place? So he writes, "Va'arbas and nifim." There were 4 side frames made out of gold and that have very peculiar shape. They are called mifutsalim b'rosheim. They were Y-shaped at their heads. You can see in that picture. In other words, they were placed on both ends of each arrangement, making sure that the bread does not go off it. And as you went higher, you need more support. That's why it was Y-shaped. It was more or less the top 2 breads were being supported not by the one lower part of the snip, but already there were 2. And that is what the Torah is referring to when it says the words ukesoisav. Halacha Yudalef. There were 28 rods of gold. They were really semi-rats, half of. You have to take a rod and you have to cut it in the middle. There's that 14 were needed for one arrangement, 14 for the other arrangement. That's 28 in total. They are called Menaki Yosov. We'll see soon exactly where they placed them. They were placed in between the breads. The two bowls, and in which you place the levaina, which was placed on the shulchan, right on the side of these arrangements. These two bazichen are called kapoisav. Another item, accessory, the right, the types of molds in which they would bake the lechem upon in breads, they are called ke'aroisav. Says the Rambam Malacha 15. The 28 rods, 14. This is what you did. The lowest of the 6 from each arrangement was placed on the table proper, on the gold. But then the between the first and the second, you would put 3 rods. That would allow for ear to go in between them. You needed 3. However, between the second to last and the top one itself, between the 6th and the 5th, there you only needed to have 2 because there's less weight, because there's nothing on top of the 6th. So it comes down to 14 on every maracha, so therefore you have the 28. Halacha 16. There were 2 tables right at the entrance of the antechamber. One was made out of marble, upon which the lechem upon it was put when you brought it in. Because even though that they were removed and replaced on the table on Shabbos, they were not allowed to be baked on Shabbos. They were baked on Friday. Where did they place them? On this shayish table. And the other one was made out of gold, upon which you would put the old lechem upon them when you removed it. Why was it made out of gold? Because since the breads are coming off a table of gold prior to the chalukah, you cannot put it on anything other than gold. Halacha Yud Zayin, the final kalim of this Pedek. Mizbach, I take that back. The second to last Mizbach HaKtoides was a meruba. It was square. Amal Amal. That's it. 1 by 1. 1 wide, one long. And it was exactly in middle meaning between north and south. However, it was not aligned in between the shulchan and the menorah, but it was mashuch maybe in shulchan and menorah towards the outside, farther away from the kodesh kach. But all of them, they were in the third of the hechel inwards. What's the cheshbon of the third? If you remember, the Gemara had a stira. In one place it says in middle, in the other place it says a third. So just to know, the cheshbon of the third is that we're going from east to west. The kodesh was 40 amas, east to west. The kodesh kachim was another 20, which means total 60. What's a third of 60? 20. 20 means half of the length of the kodesh. That's what it means. So it was in the inner more half, in the beginning of the second half or in the third. Final halacha yudches, the kiyar, the wash basin. Even though in the beginning it didn't have, but eventually we made one which had 12 taps. Why 12? That are the lucky ones that won the pious to offer the Talmud of the morning. We'll see, we had 12 kohanim involved. All of them can be mekadosh, the hands and the feet, all at the same time. Now the Rambam speaks about something that he didn't speak about in the beginning, that they made a muchni, is some sort of mechanical pulley system, in which there was water. That system, that mechanical system, was not consecrated. Because once water is put in a clay shares, it cannot be used overnight. That was the whole issue with the kir and the kanoi. They cannot leave water in there. They would actually lower it inside the muchni, inside water during the night, only to lift it up in the beginning, the first time it was needed. Shakir miklei kodesh umekadesh. And the whole anything in it that is overnighted becomes possible. So therefore, they would have to put the kiyot into water and lift it up every morning. So they made a mechanical system that facilitated this step prior to these 12 lucky kohanim being mekadesh their hands and their feet. Now, we're going to move on to the 4th chapter, which is today's final 3rd chapter. We're going to be learning about the Kodesh HaKodshim, in which you had the Evan HaShasiyah, and ideally, this man by Yisrishan, when the 3rd temple will be built, the Aron HaKodesh. We're going to learn about the secret room that Shlomo HaMelech built underground, an underground chamber in which the Rambam Paskins, Machlokes Tanoim, that right now that is where the Aron Kodesh and other very holy articles are waiting for us to bring it back to the third temple. We're going to learn about the building proper. In other words, we're going to be learning about the dimensions of the Heichal, and we said the Heichal includes the Ulam, the Kodesh, and the Kodesh Kachim as it was built this man by Yeshem. Let's begin. Perek Dalet is a shorter Perek. Perek Dalet has 13 halachas. Halacha Aleph. Even hoise b'Kodesh HaKachim b'Maravi. There was a stone, not in the center, but towards the west of the Holy of Holies. And on that Evan, we would, whenever the Aron HaKodesh was in the Holy of Holies, it was on that stone. Vilafanav means towards the east. In front of it, or in front of the Evan, either in front of the stone or in front of the ark, we had the Tzintzenes Haman, as the Torah writes, that there was a vial in which the manna is to be forever, for us to remember what God did to our grandparents, how we miraculously had parnasa as we do today. Umata Aaron, that famous Mata Aaron, towards the end of the story of Korach, that miraculously sprouted with almond flowers and almonds. So he also he built another location, which to hide the ark. And how do we get there? It's like a deep maze-like vaults, and it was waiting for it to be used until the era of Yoshio HaMelech. And when you learn the Gemara, this happened around 35 years prior to the Churban Bayis Rishon. He then, with that whole story that they found the Aron HaKodesh and they found the Sefer Torah, and they opened it up, and it was a pasuk in Parshas Kisava, and normally it was never rolled there. Remember, and he called Hulda, if you remember that whole story. And ultimately he understood that there's going to be a Churban, even though that the Hulda, because he went to a woman prophetess, she davened and it delayed the Churban. But he already hid these holy items. And by the way, that's the Rambam L'Shitasi that holds that if you go today in the place of the Beis Hamikdash, Shechayiv Kares, it's all connected. If the Rambam would have paskin like the other Tanoim that held that the Aron HaKodesh went someplace else, then maybe there wouldn't be such a big kedusha there. But since the Aron HaKodesh is actually in halachic Kodesh Kachim, so therefore there's kedushas Beis Hamikdash right there, right now. In extension, kedushas harabayis. Shnemaras, it says, "Vayimel alavim hamevinim l'chol Yisrael hakadoshim Hashem." He told him, Yoshio, "Tnuas Aron HaKodesh babayis asher bana Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael." And that bias is this hidden chamber or this hidden vault. And when they hid the Aron HaKodesh, Mata Aaron, and now the Rambam adds a third article, the Sheman HaMishkan, that was only made once. It need never be made again because it never got diminished no matter how much it was used. Now, what is the Urim V'Tumim? Let's go with Shitas Rashi Ramban. That the Urim V'Tumim is not the Choshen Mishpat B'chlal, it's not the stones, but they hold like Rashi, we learn Chitas. There was a Shem HaMefoirish that was either engraved on a golden tablet or written on parchment, and it was put inside the folds of the Choshen. That Af Urim V'Tumim, Shoyim B'Sheni, Lo Yem Meshim Ruach HaKodesh, V'lo Yem Neshalom B'hem. Shenem, it was not working. Shenem, as it says, Ad Hamoed HaKoyin Urim V'Tumim. And that was said by Ezra, implying that he didn't yet have it. So why did they use it? Why did they use the Choshen? As we'll learn soon, Halacha base. And the wall that separated these two environments, the wall itself was thick 1 amma. However, when we built the second bayis, we had it down, even though we began today learning that we had 3 Nevi'im. But they were not given, that was not given to them. Like we mentioned, there was 40 amas length of the Kodesh, another 20 amas length of the Kodesh Kachim. Really, the wall, the space, the area of the wall is either in the Kodesh or of the Kodesh Kachim, but they did not know. So therefore, what he did was they made the Kodesh Kachim a full 20 amma. To me, that's not a picture relevant to this. And then they made the Kodesh 40 ammas, complete. And they added this additional amma between the Kodesh and the Kachim, which was no man's land. It was not Kodesh nor Kachim. Furthermore, they didn't build a wall. Now, the reason why they didn't build a wall, the Rambam doesn't write, we learned just in the Gemara, is because since the height of the Bayis Sheni was much higher, even before Hurdas than Bayis Rishon. If I'm not mistaken, Bayis Rishon was 30 amps. In the beginning, Bayis Sheni was 40 or 60 in the beginning, then it became 100. And the taller you go on a wall, the wider it has to be. So the height of the Bayis Rishon, it sufficed 1 amma. But now they're even building it taller. So what did they do? They made 2 curtains, and one was Mitzara Kodesh HaKodshim, the Echad Mitzara Kodesh, and Umenichen Ubeneim Amma. So no, the curtain of the Kodesh HaKodshim was in the Kodesh Kodshim. That's what mashma. The curtain of the Kodesh was eating up of the 40 ammas of the Kodesh. The 1 amma was in between.
So what does that mean? What does that mean? It was because we said it was 40 plus 20. And where's the extra 1?
In other words, the length, that means that the length of the Heichel was 1 amma longer in Babayis Sheni, just because of that.
61.
That's what it means. Yeah. Well, it's 61, but really we'll see the whole building was 100 amps. Keneged Avi HaKoisel Shoyber Yishayin, Alo Mikdash Rishon, there was only 1 curtain. Shenemar, as it says, in other words, the Paroiches was always in one of the environments. Verstehst? But the Koisel, they knew, and now we left that area empty. The 1 amma that was empty, in between the 2 Paroiches. And halacha 3, HaHechel Shabanu B'nei HaGoyel. The Hechel, which again, that includes the Ulam and the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kachim, and as we'll see, the walls were humongous. The walls were very, very, very thick. We'll see there were many chambers, the Ta'im or the Taz, that were inside these walls. So the entire Hechel, measuring it from the outside, was Meya Amma, Al Meya Amma, Al Rum Meya. And Lahoir, that Al Rum Meya was when Hurdas made it into the greatest height. So let's go. The Rambam begins telling you, how do you get to 100 amps? Banu goiva sheish amois atum sasum. We're going milmata lamaila. The base was a solid base of 6 amas, and that was like a foundation. It didn't have a foundation in the ground, but you began with this base. Then verum kosli abayis arboim amma. The height of what we call the Heichel, can you imagine? 40 amas. That's a tall ceiling. 40 amas is be'erach 60 feet or 70 feet. Wow. Now, on top of that, you have a ornate ceiling. The height, we're speaking about heights. The room akiyoy shebatikra was 1 amma. The al gabov, on top of this ornate ceiling, was goiva shtei amos that were empty. Why did they need to have this empty space to allow the collection of water, that a drainage system? And that's why that area is called the base dilfa. Water dripping. Water was through pipes for the plumbing. Was another amma. And then you had a maziva goiva amma. And all of that is based on, now you're already on the floor of the 2nd story. There again, goiva kesuleh was 40 amas. The height was the same in the 2nd story, even though there was nothing there, as we'll see soon. Ubegaga, again, first you had, if you looked up, you would have a beautiful ceiling with ornaments, and that took up the height or the thickness of 1 amma. Then there was another 2 ammas empty for the base dilfa, for the pipings. Then you had an amma of the tikra. And then you have the plaster on top of it. Then you have a goiva, there was a mica, there was this fence on the roof, as the Torah commands us, which had 3 ammas height, so we are including that. And then on top of that, the takes, shalbaz, kamay sayev, there was some sort of sheet of iron that was blade-like, which had the height of an amma, right, the kala oirev, which was placed on top of the rail. You have to chop that. No, it's not placed only on top of the ceiling, on top of the roof. We didn't even want for birds to rest on top of this railing. And that's called the kala oidev. We used to trap the oidevs, and all of the total from the ground all the way to the top of this, so to say, crown, if you want to call it that way, was 100 amas. And now, Allah Dalet, we're moving to the dimensions from west to east. It's very interesting, Lord. Just like Milmata Lamaila L'chayda, there was more Kedusha Lamata, because the Kodesh HaKashim was Lamata. So Mistama also is beginning Maidev Lamizrach, from the holiest to the least holy. Halacha Dalet min Maidev Lamizrach Meya Amam. And here we go. How do we get to 100 Amam? Arbok Salam Zelef Nemizah. Guys, we're going from west to east. When we go today to the Kaisal Amaravi, we're facing the west. So if we were to see the wall, there were actually 4 walls up, one inside the other. There were 3 empty spaces, and there were chambers in there. The most Kaisal Amaravi was a total of 5 amas. Now we're going to see soon that these 5 amas, which is a lot, that's 7.5 feet. Okay, that included the walls and the little ta'im, these little chambers. Ben Kaisel Sheni Ushlishi was 6 amas, and Ben Kaisel Shlishi would be another 6. Just to make that clear. Now you have to add the Kodesh HaKodshim, we said, is 20 amas. That separated them was an amma. And the paroiches was thick, but like we mentioned, the paroiches ate up the space of the Kodesh HaKodshim, as the other paroiches ate up from the space of the Kodesh. But the one in between, we have to cheshbon. Which had in it the main sha'ad, was 6 amas. And then the antechamber, we're not going into the width, which was very wide, much wider than the Hechel itself. We're speaking just about the length. Mina Maida Lemizrach. The Ulam Achas Esli Amma was 11 amas. As long as, let's say, the Yisrael area and the Azar. The walls of the Ulam min Hamaida Lemizrach was 5 amas. And if you make it all together, Nimsa Koil Meya Amo. And L'chayra, if we're going from the holy to the less holy, I think the northern part had more Kedusha, ironically, because that's where you needed to shech the Kodesh HaKodshim animals. So it comes out that the earth is holier than the heavens, right? In the Beis HaMikdash, and the north, which is Gevura, is holier than the Chesed. That's the way it is. Halachei, Minatzafon L'Darim was a total of Meya Amma. Now, guys, don't make no mistake. Most of it was not 100 amma. We're speaking about Tzafon L'Darim because we are calculating the antechambers width. So let's go. Ave Kaisel Ulam, 5 amas. Umi Kaisel Ulam Ala Kaisel HaKodesh, 10 amas. No, it's the Ulam protruded on each side itself, 10 amas. Kosle HaKodesh were, again, 6 ksalim. Zeh Lifnimi Zeh, Ubenem, and therefore you had 5 empty spaces, amazing, also filled with little chambers, ta'im. Ben Kaisel HaChitzin Ben Hasheni, Chamish Amas, and like we said before, Chamish Amas includes both the area of this little room and the thickness of the walls. Uben Sheni L'Shlishi, 3 amas. Ben Shlishi L'Revi, 5 amas. Ben Nevi L'Chamishi, 6 amas. And the final, Ben Chamishi L'Kaisel HaPnimi, 6 amas. The Nimsa HaKoil, Arboim Amma Mitzadzeh. V'Arboim Amma Mitzadzeh Shekenegdoi. And then Roich of Abayis was 20 in that space of the Ulam. So it comes out, Meya. Now let's continue. Halacha Vav. There was a little gateway, which we can also call a Shar HaKatan, a Pishpash, or Shar HaKatan, that aside of the main entrance to the antechamber, on each corner, one was in the north, one was in the south. The one in the south, loy nichnas boy adamei oilam, and all of them the Yecheskel Ashar Zeh Sobur Yeh Lo Yipaseach. Ushabat Safain. That's actually the way they opened up the main sha'arim. So they went in there. Umahalech Shnei Aksalim Atmegelim Akayim Pasuach LeKodesh. You are on the left side, right? Because you went from the Safain, and then you went into the Hechel. Umahalech Achar Agadol, and then that's how you opened it up every morning. Halach Zay. Now, This Shar HaGadol, by the way, Shar HaGadol doesn't mean in size. The only physically gate that was larger than others is, as we'll see in a moment, was the Pischai Shel Ulam, double the size of all others. Shar HaGadol means in Chashivus, it was like the Chashiv. This was not the Ulam, this was the Heichal, the Koidesh's gate. It had a width of 10 amas, had a height of 20 amas. Wow. And va'arba delos Yisraela, not 2 doors. It was double doors, but it was double doors. Shtayim mibafnim, shtayim mibachutz. The ones in the outside opened up. They all opened inwards. Niftachos l'toicha Pesach. But why did it open up? We mentioned there were many walls, and there was a thickness to the walls. So it was to cover that avi of the kaisel. V'hapinimiyos niftachos l'toicha bayis, and it went actually all the way around. In other words, to cover the wall space behind the doors. Now, this was now the largest opening. Pischai Shel Ulam, like Pischolike Pesach Shel Machad, and Aniyaftach Lachem ke Pischai Shel Ulam. Now you get why we call it Pischai Shel Ulam. It had a height, guys, of 40 amas. Can you imagine? 60 or 70 feet tall opening. And it had a width of Roichav Esrim. And this, there were no gates. It's a pity that in this picture, a lot of what we're learning is not there. You can take the picture off. Now they, by the way, they did put a curtain. So the curtain was correct. But now we're going to begin to describe how the framing of this opening looked like. The Chamesh Maltiriyos Shalmela, there were 5 oak beams that were positioned on top of this Pesach, right? They were all laying. The lowest one protruded from the Pesach, which we just said. The Pesach of the Ulam was 20 amas wide. So this one was 22 amas. So it went beyond am on each side. And every one of this 5, as you went up, protruded more. Gewaltig. Comes out that the top one was 30 amas. Because you're beginning, guys, with a 20 amma wall, and you have 5 of them. And there was a tier, there was a beautiful ornamental protrusion of stones in between each one of these 5 oak beams. Halacha 9. Now, this width of 100 amas is only because we are including the ulam. The ulam, as we learned, only really went in 11 amas, plus the dimensions of the walls. But the once you went into the Kodesh, it was much narrower. So the building was structured that it was wider. Milafanov. Milafanov again means east. Milafanov means east. So let's go back to the beginning of this chapter when we spoke about the Sensenas Haman, that it was placed Lafanov. It means to the east, a good. But it was Tsar Ma'achaydev. Relative, it was narrower in the western part, like a lion. That's the way it was shaped that way. Now, we're going to be learning about 2 different types of protrusions that went outside of the entire building. One of them were called balconies, and they're called Yitziyim. The Yitziyim, but which part of the building had these balconies? And we'll see soon that since we spoke about many chambers that are called Ta'im, there was an inner winding stairwell. You began the stairwell inside these walls from the 2nd story top, the one that's on the west, the one that's on the east, north, and that stairway inside the walls took you all the way from east to west on Safain. Then that stairway circled around and it went on the Maidav side, but from north to south, and then it went back. When you're going Maidav Darim, it went back towards the Mizrach. So wherever you had in the wall this Mesiba winding staircase, on the outer side of the building, that is where they placed the balconies. Hayetzia Tachtoina Chamesh. The lowest balcony was 5 cubits long. And then there was Veroivet al Gabo Sheish. It was some sort of pavement that they put on top of it. And that was 6 amas long. Hayetzia Amsoi Sheish. We're always following a certain symmetry that all of these ornaments or protrusions or details to the building, the higher up you went, like the 5 oak beams, the longer or the wider they became. And the top one was 7.
Rabbi, these balconies were on the inside or on the outside?
Outside. But now when you looked at the balconies, you can know exactly where the Mesiba was. As it says, and they surrounded it from all 3 sides because the winding staircase there was no staircase on the eastern side. It was only, like we mentioned, on the wall of the Safin, the wall of the Maidim, and the wall of Darim. There were other types of projections, and they were like stone projections, and that's the way they did it. The first Amma, there was nothing projecting on the outside then. And then you had a Roivid that were 3 Ammas. Then you had an Amma Cholok. Then you had a Roivid Sholish Ammas. Ad Lamaila. Okay, these are not balconies. These are different types of projections. The Nimtzu Harabad Mukafel Laksav. And Roivad Kol Roivad was 3 Ammas. Ben Kol Roivad was an Amma. The Roivad to Elyoin, it was not 3 Ammas, but 4 Ammas. In other words, when you went higher, it became wider. Always that same symmetry. Halacha Yud. Now we spoke about many walls and areas inside these walls. And it wasn't just a space, but there were actually little chambers, little closets. They're called ta'im, b'lashon rabim. B'lashon yachid, it's Taf Aleph. Amazing. The last letter of the Aleph is on the first. And nimtzu hatoyim amukaf lamigdash. Take this picture off. This picture is not helpful. That what are the total? He's going to give you the cheshbon. We're going to see there were a total of 38, but he's going to tell you where they were. That chamesh, we're going 5 minat sofin, 5 minat darim, and 3 on Maidav. But that's only the lowest story. But there were 3 stories of these little closets, inside rooms, chambers. The sholish diyoyta sayu, diyoyta al gaba diyoyta. And you go from the lower one straight into the higher one. So if it comes out there was a total of 15 in the darum. Chamisha al gaba chamisha. The Rambam is changing the Seder, interestingly, right? He began Safi, now he's beginning Darum. And then you had again 5, but 5 times 3. So you have 15 in the north. And you had, interestingly, on Maidav there were 8. There were 3. 3 times 3 is 9. No, there were 3 on top of 3, but it was Shnayim al Gabeim. But on the topmost one was only 2. So total is 38. Halacha Yudal. Now, you actually were able to get from one of these cells, these chambers, into the other directly. Actually, generally, every Tah had 3 doors, 3 openings, not doors. It wasn't doors, it was openings. One was to the Tah that's on the right, one was to the Tah on the left, and one was to the Tah on the top. Now that actually means that in the middle story, you didn't have 3 at 4, because you needed one to go to the one underneath it, and you needed one to go to the top of it. On top of that, so on side of the now 4, if you are in the middle story, there was one that took you to this winding staircase. The one that's in the middle story, but on the corner of east, north, there were actually 5 psachim. Why did you need to have 5? 1 to the Tal Yamin, 1 to the Tal Shal Gabov, 1 to the Mesubah, the Echad Latoshi Ishbaya Pishpash, and the Echad Lahechol. Wow. There would be a picture of that. That would be helpful. Now let's speak about the staircase, the winding staircase, stairwell. Halach Yud Beis. Umesiba Hoisa Oila. There was a staircase that would go from the one that we just mentioned, Mikeren Mizrachis Tzfainis, Lekeren Tzfainis Maravis. It went on the northern side, all the way from Mizrach to Maidav. Because if you needed to go to the roofs of the Taim, you would use the staircase. Like we mentioned, you are on the northern part of the building, but you're walking east to west, so you're facing west. Then when you would come, until you got to the Maidav, when you would come to the west, you would make a sharp left, and you would walk now towards the south, which means you would be walking Al Panei Maidav until you come to the south. When you come to the south, you make another left. That's called Pino Sha'ata Poina Lo Ye'ela Derech Yamin. That's what Derech Yamin means. You would come to the south and you would make another left. Hafach Panav Le Mizrach. And then you would go on the Darim wall inside the walls and the staircase until you would come to finally to the Pischa Shalal. That's the way you went into the second story. The only way you got into the second story is by going on the stairwell. Shepischa Shalaliyah Yapsuach Ledarum. Final Allah Yud Gimel. Uba Pischa Shalaliyah. When you came to this entrance of the second story of the Holy Temple, there were 2 cedar beams, which is basically how we would climb up a ladder. Then he writes, when you come into the second story, there was nothing in there other than markings on the ground, which would be parallel to the location underneath it for you to know on top of what location are you walking. So these marking posts would let you know, are you on top of the Kodesh or are you on top of the Kodesh Kodesh? And then when you came to the area on top of the Holy of Holies, there were certain types of openings in the ground, which are called lulin. The lulin through which, if you needed to go into the Holy of Holies to make refurbishments, very, very nice picture of the Ta'ah and of the winding staircase, as in other words, when craftspeople would have to go into the house of the Holy of Holies, only a Kohen Gadol can enter on Yom Kippur. But there, they were allowed to lower themselves from the second story inside of certain types of boxes that were closed from 3 sides, only open in one, for them not to be able to gaze and look around because they had a very limited area in which they can see. Only in front of them to fix it, to refurbish it, to plaster it, to paint it. They were malabnim, the heichal, gewaldig. My friends, to be continued.
Thank you, Rabbi Zajac.
Rabbi, we all understood that perfectly.
Shkoyach, thank you.
Chambers 38. Shkoyach.
Guys, whoever learned the Gemara already is familiar with this. Whoever learned Rambam is familiar with it. Yeah, you'll get it.
The Gemara actually had good pictures.
I know.
Yeah.
I gotta find it.
Go ahead,
That's what we're lacking. We're lacking